Good day, everyone. This is LOURDESITA MACASILHIG, your teacher for today to discuss all about knitting, its characteristics, and the tools and materials used in this needlecraft. Knitting is a must-have life skill for it keeps your brain sharp. Engaging in activities such as knitting could reduce the chance of developing mild cognitive impairment by 30 to 50% for seniors and can reduce stress and anxiety. So, what are you waiting for? Let's know more about knitting. Knitting is a method by which yarn is manipulated to create a textile or fabric. It creates multiple loops of yarn called stitches in a line or tube. It has multiple active stitches on the needle at one time. Knitted fabric consists of a number of consecutive rows of interlocking loops. Knitting may be done by hand or by using a machine. Since knitting is the formation of a textile from interlocking loops of yarn, each stitch on a horizontal row is locked into stitches above and below, creating a durable, pliable fabric that has been used for clothing across the world over centuries. Where does knitting started? Knitwear pervades people's everyday lives. It has been estimated 1 in 5 garments worn worldwide are knits. Knitting is believed to be originated in the Middle East and 5th century. During the 14th century, the knitted textile was used by fishermen to make warm, woolen, weatherproof jumpers for trips to sea. And in 16th century, knitting machines were used to knit hosiery for elite classes. By the next century, wool stockings were exported from Britain to Germany, France, Italy, and Holland. From that, hosiery had been a mainstay of the knitting industry. It was 1816 where the first knitting loom was built and woolen mills were set up to create expensive garments. And on 1853, the first woolen textile factory was first set up by Eugene Rodier. And it was on 20th century where knitwear was part of the mainstream fashion. How do we describe knitted fabrics? Knitted fabrics are produced by interlooping of yarns and showed increasing demand for their shape fitting, smoothness, flexibility, elasticity, and good elastic recovery. All knitted fabrics may not have these properties equally. These properties are determined by raw material types and characteristics, knitting machine parameters, and type of knit structures. Knitted goods of all kinds are generally popular because of their flexibility and ability to adapt, as well as stretch them to a particular shape when worn, and also because of their general comfortable wear. The dimensional stability of the knitted fabric is reflected in the capability of the products made from spandex, which means to expand. There are two basic types of knits, the weave or filling knits and the warp knits. Weft is a knitted piece of fabric where the stitches run from left to right horizontally across the fabric. It is usually knitted with one piece of yarn and can be made either by hand or using a knitting machine. Rib knit is a weft knit that results in a vertical columns of knit and purl stitches. Another type of weft knit is the purl. Purl is a knitting stitch usually made with the yarn at the front of the work by inserting the right needle into the front of a loop on the left needle from the right, catching the yarn with the right needle and bringing it through to form a new loop. Next type is the double knits. Double knits allows you to create 2 layers of fabric at the same time with only one pair of needles. The finished fabric is entirely reversible, lending itself to color work, contrasting fibers, or simply a finished piece that is twice as warm. Use 2 contrasting colors and you can create a piece of knitting with one color on each side and no wrong side. This is the second type of knit, the warp. The warp is the least common form of knitting. Instead of stitches running horizontally across the knitted piece of fabric like in weft knitting, they run vertically down the fabric. They are knitted in continuous threads, meaning that long pieces of fabric are made and then the garments are cut out, much like it would be done with a woven piece of fabric. It is the most complex form of knitting. That is why it is seldom used. Warp knitting requires the use of a machine and it cannot be done by hand. It is also the mechanical equivalent of hand crochet knitting. Let's discuss the basic types of warp knits. One of it is tricot. A tricot is a very thin and smooth textured knit consisting of fine or single yarns which form vertical rails on the surface of the fabric and crosswise ribs on the back, thus resulting in a run-resistant knit. Tricots are often used for the construction of swimwear, underwear, sportswear, and gloves. With a remarkable amount of stretch, curves are no match for the elasticity of tricots. Tricot is a knit fabric that is very lightweight with lots of durability. Second type of warp knitted fabric is ruched, a knit made in a special knitting machine with yarns from warp beam. The face side of the fabric has slightly inclined vertical knitting loops, whereas the backside of the fabric has inclined horizontal floats. They do not travel. Also, they do not stretch significantly and are often bulky. Another type of warp knit is Melanes. Melanes are diagonal stitches, typically in groups of 4, with each stitch one row wider than the previous. The resulting element looks like a triangle or an arrowhead. It is made with 2 sets of warp, one moving downward to the left and the other downward to the right, with a diagonal crossing producing a diamond effect on the back and a fine rib showing on the surface. Discuss the tools and materials in knitting. Proper tools and materials is necessary for you to start the knitting process. You don't need to have many tools as long as you've got the right one. First is yarn. Yarn refers to the ball band, which states the fiber content, weight, suggested needle size, gauge, and die-lot number. Choose a yarn that is suitable for your project. To ensure that all your yarn for a project is exactly the same color, buy it all at once and check that the die-lot numbers match. Second tool is a needle. A knitting needle or knitting pin is a tool in hand knitting to produce knitted fabrics. A needle size is based on its diameter and it's indicated with a number or in millimeter. Standard sizes range from 0 to 50. Needles are divided into 2 basic categories, the straight or the circular needles. Straight needles allow the knitter to work back and forth, producing flat pieces. Circular needles allow the knitter to work in a continuous round, producing tubular pieces. The third one is the stitch marker. Stitch marker is a knitting tool used to identify an important place in your knitting. It can find them in fixed forms or rings. These small notions are used to mark a certain number of stitches in a row, increases and decreases, and any repeats in your knitting pattern. Fourth one is the stitch gauge. This tool is a flat piece with a ruler mark on one side and cut out windows to easily measure stitches and rows. Any knitting project begins with a gauge. Another tools in knitting are needle gauge and point protector. Needle gauge refers to the flat measuring tool used to ascertain the size of a knitting needle, essentially an odd-shaped ruler with a number of holes in it. This tool is punched with holes or rings in corresponding sizes that allows you to identify the size of the needles easily. While point protector, also known as stopper, are small rubber cups that cover the pointed ends of your needles to ward against dings and scratches. They prevent stitches from slipping off the needles. It helps prevent knitting mistakes by keeping stitches securely on your needles. Seventh tool is the scissor. Scissors is a cutting instrument having 2 blades whose cutting edges slide past each other. A reliable pair of scissors always come in handy. And this is also true for knitting. There are a range of sizes and styles, but the best scissors will complement your working style. Next is the stitch holder. Stitch holders are tools that are used by knitters to hold open stitches when not being used by the needles. It is also similar to safety pin. The stitch holder is used to clasp together a group of stitches that will be bound off or work later in the pattern. Another tool is a tape measure. A tape measure is a flexible instrument used for measuring lengths and distances. It consists of a ribbon of cloth, plastic, fiberglass, or metal strip with linear measurement markings. This tape measure is an essential tool for many industries and applications. The last one is the yarn bowl. This tool holds the working yarn securely, and the spherical shape can accommodate many sizes of yarn. It solves the problem of the ball of yarn rolling and bouncing around the room during the set knitting.